a nice mix of things. I can put my cap on if we need that as well.
Cap on cap. Yeah, let's do it.
Should we do that? Love it. How did you come to focus on sports narratives in film and books?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I was thinking about my kind of academic journey, I suppose. I'm a professor of film and television studies, that's my title, but actually I probably work a bit more broadly outside and in different mediums. And I think thinking more about narratives in a broader sense is probably more a helpful way of describing what I do and what I'm interested in. And I've done a kind of 10-year period, I've been quite focused on cinema. And I'm focused particularly on realism and the idea of how cinema can kind of bring us into a closer dialogue with our realities. And often that's about films that are seeking to reflect the lived experiences of people, and that we as audiences have a kind of recognition and a proximity to them. And through that process, I was very much focused on the contemporary. And I was craving, I think, a return to sort of my roots in academic work, which was to go back to the sort of 1960s and 1950s, because that was a really pivotal moment in something I'm really interested in, which is kind of class and how class is talked about, is represented in popular cultures, in literary cultures, in film culture, in media cultures, in creative industries, but also how working class voices are represented through those, and how those cultures are opened up to, those industries are opened up to people from working class backgrounds. And there was, of course, a flowering of that in the 1950s and the 1960s. And yeah, we were lucky enough to have at the University of Sheffield, where I work, the Barry Hines archive. So Barry Hines was a writer. He's probably most famous for two things, I think. Kes, which a lot of people are very familiar with, and Threads, which people are also very familiar with. That imagines the end of the world through the lens of Sheffield. And it's been remade actually by war films, and so there'll be much more noise about that. But often people don't put the two things together, but actually they are probably two of the most kind of widely revered examples of sort of post-war working class culture, I would argue. And yeah, but people don't tend to put them together. So the project really was looking at the archive and exploring not only the work that he'd produced, but also the worlds that had produced that work, right? So an archive allows you to understand so much more about the context and the sort of socio-economic, cultural context that determine the output of a writer. And with Hines, it became really clear that sport was really important to him. And he was somebody who, when sort of delving into his biography and exploring these archival documents and fragments, he realised that he was first and foremost an athlete. He saw himself like that. He was also quite academically gifted, and he passed the 11+, which is a quite common trajectory for writers of that period. So working class writers were kind of, in a way, pulled out of their social class through the 11+, put into a grammar school environment. For him, it was about coming from Barnsley, from a coal mining community in Barnsley, and going to North Sheffield, not too far away, but in Ecclesfield Grammar School. But there he didn't really connect with English literature, didn't really connect with academic subjects. What he really connected with was sport. And so, long story short, he ended up studying at Loughborough Training College, as was, to become a physical education teacher. An extremely good football player, played with players there who went on to have professional careers. Bob Wilson's one of them who played for Arsenal in Scotland, for example. And so he was playing a really quite high standard of football. And he got injured, and he talked to his roommate, and he said to his roommate, I'm a bit bored, have you got anything to read? And so the legend has it, he lent him Animal Farm by George Orwell, and he was completely hooked. And he became really interested in this idea of discovery, like what are the conditions that bring us into contact with and enable us to discover, when are we given permission to discover things, in this case the arts, because he was kind of taught in a way that said it wasn't for him, and it certainly wasn't taught in a way that was made inclusive for him or that allowed him to connect to it. So yeah, he had this thing, and it was this eureka moment, or this catalysing moment where he read it and it really spoke to him, and he started reading Hemingway and Faulkner, and he just raced through it. And this is when he's at Teacher Training College, and he starts then to experiment with some of these ideas around this kind of nascent literary identity that he's fostering very, very quickly, and combining that with his physical experiences as an athlete, as someone who's training future athletes, as someone who's educating people to be physically in top condition, to be competitive, all the rest of it. he starts to think about the politics of that. He's also someone who's from a working class background, very much left of centre, described himself as a socialist. So he started to think about the ways that those particular kinds of narratives, if you like, through sport, education, condition us to be in certain ways. And again, it comes back to that idea of discovery. Who has the permission to discover things? How are the conditions set for people to discover? So he starts exploring that in his own writing, and he has some quite progressive teachers at the university or the college who allow him to write a piece of creative writing. And that's one of the things we discovered in the archive. He wrote this dissertation about this boy who was a brilliant footballer, but was also someone who was really interested in the arts. He was interested in history. He was interested in classical world, if you like. And he started to kind of question the fact that he was not able to be both of those things. And he started this character in this dissertation. He began to think about the way that sport could also be an artistic practice. And I think Hines' contention was that sport is not allowed to be talked about in those ways because we put people in particular boxes, and you are an athlete, you are a almost machinic figure, kind of produced by your environment and instrumentalised your body in a particular way, or you're an intellectual, an artist. And Hines saw that very much in class terms. You know, we talked about the fact that we talk about ballet dancers and we rarefy them and we ascribe a particular set of cultural meanings to them, but we don't do that with number 10 on a football pitch. And he was trying to kind of challenge that in his fiction, and that's what he did with his first novel. So I was really interested in that, and it's an element that I've really sought to kind of work through, and it's become then a kind of fascination with another writer that I've looked at, and I'm working on his archive, which is based at the University of York, and trying to do lots of projects about him. That guy called David Story, who's a bit older than Barry Hines, but born in a very similar part of the country, very similar background. He's from Wakefield, Hines is from Barnsley. His father was a miner just like Hines. He trained as an artist at the Slade, and then he became a writer, but he was also a professional rugby league player.
Yeah.
So he talks about the kind of the tension of those two worlds. You know, he was called a ruffian at art school, and he was kind of seen as a kind of northern degenerate. And then in the rugby team, he was kind of the subject of homophobic bullying. And he also saw that split as kind of central to his own struggles that he lived with throughout his life, really, which was never really resolved, but it was kind of the main theme of his fiction. You know, being caught in these two worlds and not able to reconcile them. For him, it was about the class identity, the expectations of class, but also being the son of a grammar school, of a coal miner, going to grammar school, and then turning around to his father almost and feeling disenfranchised, disconnected, alienated, and his father not really knowing how to respond to that ambiguity, because his father had dug at that seam and worked every hour that God sent in order to give his children a better life than him. Yeah. And the guilt that he felt, I think, was profound. And sport became a way of understanding that, the ways that sport dichotomizes us, puts us into one place or another. And look, I think the value of that and the way of thinking about it now is just, we can see that all around us, and the way that sport is so often a proxy for how we talk about other elements of identity, the way that sport can become a way of alienating people, can also bring out the worst in us in terms of our tribalist tendencies and our kind of more intellectually reductive and socially and politically reductive narratives, as well as being an empowering and enabling one. So I see that really resonating in contemporary society. So yeah, it was those writers' work really that really kind of brought me into thinking about sport in those ways, as something which is more of a narrative process, I guess. And then obviously also connects to my personal interests, because I love sport. I've always loved sport. I've always thought about sport in a very sort of as probably a lot of people, particularly young men, get fascinated by football at a certain age, and you know you devote a lot of brain energy to it. And I think I've begun to intellectualize it in my kind of pretentious teenage years. But then also playing sport and becoming really interested in running and seeing running as itself a kind of way of thinking, running as a kind of an exercise, in an intellectual exercise as much as it's a physical one. So yeah, there's an almost symbiotic connection with all those sorts of things swirling around. So it's become a really, something that's really interested me.
It feels proper grassroots, top to bottom, that this runs through you, you know, that you think and feel it, which is, I think, rare. There aren't many people who maybe would get to research something that they can physically express in as well.
Yeah. Well, do you know, I'll give you a good example of that, Jack. I did a project last year with an artist called Patrick Murphy, who's based in Barnsley, and I worked with him around some of the 50th anniversary celebrations of Kes and Kestrel Frenay in Barnsley. And we did a project for the Festival of the Mind called Estate, and it was kind of about the idea of where culture comes from, where creative ideas happen, and we fixed that through the lens of thinking about council estates as creative spaces. So thinking about so many of the writers that I was interested in my research, and that Patrick himself was someone who was an artist from a council estate, and I'd grown up on a council estate as well. And so we were sort of thinking about how those are kind of sites of creativity and also really powerful sites of representation. So we wrote this kind of book together for this installation that Patrick produced. And the essay that I wrote for it was basically a reflection on a run that I took from, or a couple of runs that I did from Sheffield to Wakefield, ultimately, sort of taking me through Barnsley, so Sheffield to Barnsley to Wakefield, taking me through Barry Hines country to David Story country. And yeah, that was really interesting to me because I think it brought me into a much closer relationship with their writing. Their writing frequently turns to the in-between spaces, the kind of, I think, quite unique topographies and landscapes of the West and South Yorkshire coalfields, which are kind of full of edgeland spaces, in-between spaces, kind of built up towns and villages, and then suddenly these rolling fields. And running along the Transpennine Trail, you get a real feel for the texture of that. And this is kind of much more visceral engagement with the landscape. But you have the literature, the films, the television dramas, the writing, as a sort of reference point that helps you to contextualise that, and it brings you into a closer relationship with the kind of layers of writing, of thinking, of artistic and cultural expression that have been produced by and in those landscapes by those writers. And I felt, like I found a new connection with them by doing that, and by going through the places that had inspired them and thinking about their landscape writing. I don't think I'd have done that if I was on the train or in the car, or even if I was walking. I think there's something that I can't quite define about running that helps you to read and know a place in a different way. I think it probably is to do with the fact that you can move through a space quite quickly, but every single step is one that you are taking in the same way that every single word you read on a page is one that you are taking and kind of processing and comprehending. So there's a kind of running and reading parallel, I think, that's really interesting.
When you opened this, you're talking about, in the narratives, maybe sport being a way for people to get out of their situations, to kind of get out of their classes. With running, I think for you and I, if I remember, it was your Like the Wind article, where you talk about getting into running after leaving.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I wrote that essay, I guess, for a running magazine called Like the Wind during COVID, because I was kind of really keen to go back to where I came from, because I'd not been back for a while. My mum at the time was living in a care home, and I wasn't able to see her. She had Alzheimer's, and she'd been in a care home with Alzheimer's for a long time, and a big part of my life was seeing her quite regularly, and that was something you couldn't do during COVID. And I was very aware that she was coming to the end of her life. A couple of years later, she died. So, that I began to reflect a bit on running's place within that element of my journey, of my own experience. And running had been a really important way of me making sense of that. And I think when anyone who gets into a certain stage of life, and I was in my 30s, people start dying, real life things start to happen, and you need, in a way, resources that help you to think, to make sense of things, to confront, to imagine, to contextualize, to remember. And running is a really powerful one for that. It's not just about pumping endorphins into you. It's about kind of new perspectives. It's about new ways of seeing, and it's also about going back. And so, I went back to that village and kind of saw it anew through the lens of running. When I was there, I played. I was a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid. Like those, that's the most vivid memories for me. And younger, playing football, being with mates, just doing the things that kids do. But going back there as someone who could run it, like cover so much ground, just go through my old estate, go through the backs, go through those places that my mum had walked and, that my mum experienced. It was a really powerful thing, a really beautiful thing. And it really helped me to understand and make peace with that place. I think when you're young, you're on this kind of forward trajectory. You know, certainly for me, going to university, it was like everything was about the future. It was about, well, that part of my life is done and now I move on. And yeah, I don't think I'd had that opportunity to step back, and running kind of forced that really. It gave me, and COVID as well, an outlet to start to make sense of and to work through some of those memories and to make peace with them and to form a connection with that place again. And yeah, it was a really powerful way of managing grief actually, but not just grief of my mum, but grief of a life and a part of a life and a part of my life that I thought I'd left behind that actually I felt I was able to find much greater peace with. So I think running, yeah, it has been a really powerful way for me of just making sense of things in my life, you know.
I wonder if there's a link, a neuroscientific link with running and connections, the way that you described going through landscapes. I nearly always have this feeling of a loading screen. You know, I grew up with PlayStation 2, that the disc would spin for maybe 10, 15 seconds before the next scene would load up. And running sometimes feels a bit like that, particularly if you're on back roads between places, that you kind of come into the next scene. You know, you see this landscape opening up or closing down, and you know you completed a chapter or you're moving on to another one. And for me, at the start of this year, I got into running in a place that I would never really have enjoyed it. You know, I was running around North Yorkshire where I grew up, and I would regularly go to one of the first houses that I could remember. It's right underneath Captain Cook's Monument, right underneath the Hambleton Hills. And to be in that place, but 30 years older, and still feel what it was like, and to have gone back to it, to have reconnected it almost. And it used to be the case, obviously it's not with London taxi drivers anymore with Uber, but cabbies would have to go through the knowledge and understand every single street in the place that they were driving. And maybe there is that element of, if you're constantly going between places, that the dots are being linked by the physical action of moving through, but then also the memory, the feeling of going through at the same time.
So I think that's about also, we need to pay attention to the going through, don't we? Like, we need to pay attention to the in-between. I think one of the things that, maybe this is an Instagram culture thing, but you know, we're always been asked to look for the views in a way, to find the most aesthetically pleasing or spectacular parts of the run in order to contextualize it, to grasp at it, to say that it happened and to present it to the world. And actually the bits that really matter are those in-between bits that you describe. I think the bits that really matter are the bits between you and the pavement sometimes. As much as I think running is a beautiful communal, can be a beautiful communal social activity, I also think it can be about building a kind of relationship with those overlooked places, those in-between places, those liminal or edgeland spaces as well. And what you described there about finding some kind of a renewed sense of perspective through running, I'd argue is also achieved by the way that running forces a more mindful appreciation of a place and a landscape, and stops us from simply fixating on the end points, but actually becomes more iterative about the processes that connect those and make those end points meaningful, I suppose. Yeah. Just like a narrative process, right?
100%. And it's a strange feeling to maybe see a picture of a place, but then to have been stood in the place where that picture was taken and know how your shins felt, or know how out of breath you were. I've got a friend in Crosby who has a pinboard of postcards from various family members. And first time I went round, there was one I recognised. I said, "Tom, do you know where that is?" He said, "Yeah, that's Ayers Rock." Ayers Rock? That's Rosebery Topping in Great Ayton. He looked on the back of it and realised he'd never actually read where it was from.
Yeah, like I say, you know, running really powerfully enables that. I think it's hard to articulate, but that's what makes it magical.
Each episode of F&T takes about 10 hours to put together from start to finish. So if you could give me a second, maybe 2 seconds of your time to drop a like, subscribe, follow, and maybe even 5 seconds to leave a nice comment or a 5-star review, that would be incredible. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode, and I'll see you in about 3 seconds.
You're keen on more people getting into running, and you were a big part of parkrun coming to Sheffield, is that right?
Yeah, well, junior parkrun, yeah. So I'm trying to think, my journey into running kind of started when I was writing my PhD about 2008, and then, you know, I had unhealthy habits, and I needed to find a way of kind of, PhD is quite a solitary process. So I got into running. Some friends of mine were doing the Sheffield half marathon, did that with them, then a friend told me about parkrun, and we did a few. And to be honest, in those early days, I was in my 20s. It was at Encliffe Park. There was about 200, 300 people there. So it was nowhere near as big as it was now. To be honest, they were often quite hungover runs. You know, I was still burning the candle at both ends in my 20s. Left it a bit, and then a few years later, 5 or 6 years later, got talking to some friends who'd approached me and my partner about helping them to set up a junior parkrun in Sheffield. So by that time, there were probably 2 or 3 parkruns already set up. And that was the thing that really got me back into running in a serious way, actually, was becoming involved in setting that event up, because I really got to understand the ethos of parkrun, that it wasn't just about something for me, it was a genuine community act and a community event and a community entity. And I kind of began, and I think for young people, so the junior parkrun is different from the adult one in as it takes place on a Sunday, it's 2K, it's 4 to 14 year olds. But you know, the same principles apply really, it's for everybody. And I think through that process sort of started to see the value in volunteering. And you know, one of the jobs that we had to do in those early weeks, months, years actually, getting it off the ground at Graves Park, was getting volunteers, making sure we had 20 volunteers every week. And after a while, you know, it becomes quite easy, but well, easier to do it because the parents and supporters of children will come along and give their time. But just talking to some of the volunteers who are helping us to organise and kick things off, it was sort of picking their brains about the idea, the motivators for volunteering. And I chatted to an amazing guy called Frank, who was one of the Yorkshire ambassadors. And he said, think about volunteering as just asking people to give their time to the run. And I really reflected on that idea of giving something of yourself to something for the greater good. You know, it's a pretty simple and very noble idea, but it's one that, you know, we don't really have many opportunities to do that anymore. You know, we live in a largely secular society, I think, and we live in largely transactional spaces. And I think fitness industry, if you like, really is, as you all know, you know, is something that can very much be about an individuated market economy, or we engage in that process as a consumer, and our goals are very much about commodification of ourselves. And you know, to come back to some of the elements of the writing, and the work that I've been doing, that's been something I've really explored in those sports narratives. And a parkrun isn't really about that. Yes, there's sponsorship and all the rest of it, but parkrun is about being a part of something bigger than yourself. And I would encourage everybody to volunteer just once at parkrun and see the magic of it. So, I mean, I've run maybe getting close to 300, and I've got about 80 volunteer credits because I've done a lot of the junior parkrun ones. But what I'll tend to do is I'll do a hard session at a parkrun, and normally it is for me because it's part of a longer run, and I'll maybe do a really hard 5K, and then and what I've been doing in recent weeks actually is just getting out my phone and doing the barcode scanning afterwards. It's amazing the conversations you have with people, and you see a whole range of experiences, and you ultimately just get kind of micro doses of positivity. Just you absorb people's energy, and hopefully they absorb yours. And you realise that we've kind of come together, a group of people, for an hour. You know, we're told that we don't talk to each other anymore. We might have different political views, we might have different religious views, we might have different backgrounds. We've come together in a shared experience. We're doing something which is good for our minds and our bodies. We're doing that together. We're doing it in a shared space. We're respecting that space. We're building reciprocity. We're building something together for the greater good. All of us who are participating in it. And everybody is going to finish that. The vast majority are going to come away and they'll not regret it. They're going to be happy. And you see that as a volunteer. You see it all the way. You know, I love the fact that at parkrun, no one finishes last, because there's a volunteer who's always a tail walker, who's always going to come last. The emphasis on walking now, on movement, is fantastic. I think a key metric for parkrun is that they want the average time to be slower every year. That means they're more inclusive as an organisation and more people have been involved. And to me, that is about us modelling something towards the good society. And I don't think there are many opportunities for us to do that in this day and age, you know, in an atomised online world, to actually bring people together in an embodied environment where we have an emphasis on common experience and on building something together. And I think that's really important when we think about fitness, which is so much about the individual and individualism and individual goals. And that's fine, but I think there's also something about harnessing that individual desire, instinct, spirit, motivation within a communal whole as well. You know, you can go to parkrun and not talk to anybody else and still feel a connection with people. You know, just like you could go to a rave and do that, or a cinema. You know, it's a communal activity, but it's free, and I think, yeah, I get quite evangelical about it, because, you know, I think there are so few opportunities for us to do that. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend to people just to sign up and get involved, just to volunteer at least once.
The two phrases I had in my head as you describing that were Huxley and Hacienda. Because it is that thing of a collective experience of living and breathing the same drops, the highs, the lows. It's embodied, you're choosing to be a part of it, and all hopefully on the same up, and hopefully able to manage the same come down. The Huxley bit, I had a conversation with a research associate at King's College recently, and she's really interested in psychedelics in mental health, but also in naturalistic settings. And she references Huxley in her talk called The Science of Psychedelics. The quote is along the lines of, the drugs occasion the change. So drugs aren't necessary to experience hallucinations or to have these trips or psychedelic experiences. We have the capacity for these already. You know, for people who maybe run with intensity, or run in groups, or who give birth at home, you know, or maybe chant in a forest in a circle together. You can tap into a state that's already in the body. You don't need something exogenous as such. It's the occasion that brings it out of you. And absolutely, the first parkrun, the first half marathon, there was something bordering on spiritual about it. And to have one last kind of house reference to tie it together, if I see a man waving, does that mean that I'm not alone? I remember going up a hill completely by myself on the half marathon, and there was nobody to run with, there was nobody else's breath to hear. It was just my kind of labour, so to speak. And I was struggling, it was a little bit gritty underneath, so grip wasn't great, it was hot, I was sweating, but there was somebody in a purple vest at the top who was making a racket. And I was just like, okay, cool, I've got something to aim for.
Get to that person.
I couldn't say hello when I got there, but she just kept on clapping, said well done, and that was enough to keep on going.
I mean, just as an aside, I think I've got a friend that I run with, actually a couple of guys I run with, and we've all decided that ex-ravers are quite a kind of common constituency in running. So we definitely fall into that category. So I think that analogy is very appropriate, Jack. But I'd also be interested to hear a bit about more about that experience for you, because I'm really interested in how, as runners, we can continue to create those moments. And that moment you just described is obviously one that is indelible. It will stay with you. It's almost like your kind of running origin moment, the moment when you kind of clicked and you found that flow and you found that spiritual elevation, if you like, that comes with running. And I sometimes worry that people can lose that. We have goal fixation. We're like, next half marathon or PB, and actually I'm really interested in how we just build that into everyday running. Every day, every run contains something of that, right? So it's not always about the next thing. It's about actually finding ways to be intentional about every single run, that you can create a kind of fabric of moments of euphoria, or that enable that euphoria, and that you're not, and that yes, we can pursue individual goals, and that's really important to create structure and coherence, but also just finding that joy in every run. Like, do you feel like you're at that stage now with your running? Or
I think there is an element of it. There's a photo that's off camera that I want to get for you, because I think you might enjoy it. So this is my first half and Beth's third. She and I obviously recognised where the camera person was on the laps, and she said to me before the run, I imagine that you'll lap me at about this point.
Right.
And I saw her from about a kilometre away, and I knew that she'd do a silly pose for it. So I absolutely busted a gut to catch her. And the guy in the shades behind me, he and I had fallen in step. So I think this was the first kind of social fitness bit for me. He seemed to be going for the same time as me, seemed to be a better runner than me. You know, this is my first run, so I'm looking at everybody else. And he started falling behind. And so I just gave it a, come on, lad. And he responded with, all right, lad.
Yes, I love it.
And we did a lap together. So this is a lapped run. So we did the third lap together.
Nice.
And then I gunned for this photo, and kind of fell back a little bit.
Yeah.
And then he overtook me from there and finished at the time that he was going for.
Mm-hmm.
But for me to know that I would have made somebody laugh
Yeah.
who was just volunteering at the event, and maybe if we got a photo, I would make Beth laugh. Yeah, that was a lovely moment in the run that I couldn't have planned for.
Because previously when you were describing it, you were talking about it as quite a contained or self-contained process. It's something you were experiencing and you were having these moments, and then that anecdote was more about your connection with other people. So I think there's something powerful about how we harmonise or balance or connect that those kind of individual moments that are self-contained and those more connected moments. And I think those sorts of communal experiences can really foster that. You have the stuff that you're thinking, the stuff that you're experiencing, the thoughts that you might hold on to, or the ones that are fleeting, and you always have these connections. And that connection with that guy, like, you'd probably never see him again, but you shared something that day.
Yeah.
You know,
It was
and
amazing.
the two of you shared something as well, you and Beth as well. You know, that photograph is
On your point of the so we've got the inter and the intrapersonal. I think I was more aware than ever on that run of things not working.
Yeah.
Like a jet coming into land without an engine. I knew that I was going to finish the run.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't to me about the time or being first. It was about finishing.
Yeah.
And my hip was in bits. My knee was in bits.
Yeah.
Ankles had been a problem all the way through. And I could feel all of that. And it felt at one point that my leg just wasn't flexing at the knee. You know, this wasn't optimal running. And maybe there was a moment where I could have thought about walking and nobody would have known, and it wouldn't have mattered if I did.
Yeah.
But I was there to do a thing, and I felt so in my body in a way that I hadn't before, that, okay, cool, this is my new best, if you know what I mean. Yeah. There's no point me pretending that I'm not in pain. I am in pain. But if I can breathe through it, be in this moment, this is the hardest thing that I have done. And I'm proud, privileged, whatever it is, to be here, to be doing it. So I am going to do it.
And that's an amazing lesson for life, isn't it? You know, that's a wonderful articulation of resilience, of adaptation, you know, of understanding the relationship between our intentions, what we imagine, what we aspire towards, and the realities, but also how we make new meaning out of these conditions we find ourselves in. I think as well what you described is a really powerful way of like answering what I posed earlier, which is like, how do we create value in all those experiences, even if they're not going well? Like, this is something I'm reckoning with at the moment, where I'm 41 years old. I've run, you know, fast 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. The marathon is something that eludes me. The sub 3 marathon is something that I nearly ran 2 years ago. I got around 3 hours and 36 seconds. And, you know, that was such an obsession, still an obsession. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll train harder, smarter, and we'll go again. And I ended up running 5 minutes slower than that. You know, I mean, there were some factors, I think, that I'm not going to go into, but ultimately I had to reckon on, okay, I did that when I was 39, and then when I was 40, maybe I'm just getting too old for this. And I'm trying again and all the rest of it. But something I've thought about has been, you know, I don't want to get back to the place that I got to before that last marathon, where I could only think about that race. I could only think about the execution of sub 3. I lost sight of why I was running. You know, I'd never felt in that race that I found flow, that I found that hypnotic state where you're just not thinking about anything, where you feel like you're flying. The pain cave will come, but it will be something you can manage and you're ready for it. And that's how it's going to work. If I ever get it, that's how it's going to work. And on that day, I never found that. I was always uncomfortable. There was always something wrong. And it really did make me think, after all the races I've done, all the miles I've done, all the, like, that goal fixation became too much, you know. And, you know, ask me in 8-10 weeks' time when I've got my next marathon, I might be in the same state. But I hope I won't be. I hope I'll be able to just say, like you did, whatever happens, I'll find some meaning in it, you know. And ultimately in that race, I finished it, and I'm proud that I finished it. But, you know, it was absolutely, I'd not ever even anticipated being that far behind my goal. So I need to learn to adjust my value settings, and I need to learn to adjust my ego, and I need to learn to kind of be thankful that I can actually just run and move and do those things and have the joy of testing my body and exploring my limits and and recognise that that's enough.
What would sub 3 hours mean to you there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, isn't it? Because I would then probably think about sub 2:59, you know. So for me, it has to be about the journey. I think what it will mean is it will be a way of narrativizing or containing everything of the last 5 years that has been coming up to that moment, and a way of making sense of this period of my running life. And I hope, actually, that once I've got it, if I get it, that it will allow me to do more of the running that I haven't done really much of, which is like ultramarathons and trail stuff and stuff, which is a little bit less focused on time and perhaps more focused on experience. But I would love also to do more to support other people to run, like, not necessarily coaching, but kind of guided runs and things like that, and supporting, being a run leader and things, which I used to do a bit of before COVID, and I found really valuable. And just to be able to hear people's stories, to talk to people about running, that was a really interesting thing to me, actually. When I used to, with my old club, I helped out with a 5 to 10k group. So a lot of people who'd maybe done a couch for 5k, and they were beginning in running and learning about the barriers that they'd faced, and learning about some of the challenges that people experience, and just lacing up, you know, and getting out there. And I felt so privileged to hear that, but I was also really frustrated to hear how many external barriers people had faced, you know, and I really want to remove that, because as you can tell, I'm really passionate about it, and it's something that, you know, that kind of volunteering element, again, that I'd love to get more into, not because of any kind of desire to do good, but because I want to learn. You know, I want to hear more about what enables people to find joy and peace and harmony through running, but also what the blockers are to try and remove those.
What are the most common ones you come across?
I think a lot of people talk about speed a lot. I couldn't possibly run that fast, or I'm slower than that. And what I'd always say to that is, like, some people would look on my Strava and think, wow, he's really quick. But I know there's like 20, 30 people on my Strava that are running way faster than me, and there's going to be 20, 30 people on theirs that are running at a national level, and then there are people that are in the Olympics or whatever else. There's always going to be someone who's faster than you. It's about you setting your own parameters and your own context. That obsession with speed, I think, is really unhelpful, but I can totally understand it. And I think that comes back to one of the reasons why, you know, I love junior parkrun, because the work that we did in setting that up, I got the privilege of seeing, like, young people who. So one of the people who the kind of core group, like, one of their kids started out running. He was in the mix. He was usually one of the third or fourth finishers, and he now, as a teenager, has a Yorkshire vest. He runs for Yorkshire, and you know, the biggest county in the country, hugely competitive. But he's also a run director. He organises the parkrun now as a teenager. He does the briefings. He's there supporting kids of all ages, sizes, abilities. And I don't think there are many other opportunities where you would see, or sporting occasions actually, where you would see someone who is frankly elite now, or close to elite, placing so much emphasis on the sport as a site of inclusion and setting parameters which are about getting as many people involved. So for me, that's that thing about harnessing competitiveness. That run for him, he will run hard and competitive. He's a super competitive young man. But that's balanced by a recognition of that's how he runs it, but also it means something completely different to someone who's running 2K in 10, 12 minutes. You know, he's running it in 6. Someone else is doing it the other way. They're just as valid. It's just as valid. Just like me running a 3-hour marathon is just as valid as someone walking a 7-hour one. If that's been provoked a positive life change for them, if that's helped them in some way, if that's got them into a positive and healthy routine, that's an amazing thing. And you know, we're so quick to kind of ascribe value systems in such rigid ways, and I think it's up to people to define their own, right? And so yeah, I think that, but I also think people carry really powerful associations, to come back to what we started with, where sport at school, physical activity, has been a site of profound exclusion. You know, and I'm sure you see this in your work, Jack, where people just say, well, it's not for me. I think that's one of the things that's been really powerful, not just parkrun, but see it around Sheffield, you know, kind of move towards more inclusive, movement-orientated activities where it's just about getting together and not having any barriers to entry. And I think, I'm in a club actually that has a really strong emphasis on everybody can join, but also we are focusing on improvement. We want everybody to improve. So there's no barriers to entry, but it is actually about pushing ourselves. And that's the emphasis in the club. But there are other clubs that are very much with that focus on inclusion and just doing it, and that's cool as well. So I think it's about understanding the parameters of engagement, but really I think we need to be much more attentive to the really powerfully negative associations that people can carry with them, and I think we need to be doing way more sport in schools, I think, but we have to have a different emphasis on the kind of sport that we do. I think competitive sport is great. I think it teaches us so much, but we have to also recognise that movement and exercise and getting young people outside in some way and just getting the air in their lungs and getting them moving is almost more important than that. And recognising that maybe you're not good at football, maybe you're not good at cricket, maybe rugby league, rugby union aren't your thing, but there'll be other sports that you can do. There's other things that you can try, and we have to get to that kind of a conversation, I think. So really understanding what those negative determinants are of people's journeys through sport and physical exercise, I think a movement are really important. We have to have a much greater conversation about that and understanding that for so many people it's a site of exclusion. Those memories are traumatic, frankly, for a lot of people, and that's something that through some of the conversations I've had was really powerful for me.
Understanding that exercise, team sports, games, they're frameworks for movement, as you say. And what if we went out to play a game of football, but the aim wasn't to outscore the opponent? The aim was to have the best game you possibly could at right back.
Yeah.
And maybe that would mean that you connected really nicely with your right winger. You managed to tackle well, and you got a couple of headers in. Or you jumped for everything.
Yeah.
Whether you won them or not.
Yeah.
How much better would you feel about the game?
Yeah.
And I was crushed after every single football game because we were a bunch of scared kids playing against teams.
Yeah.
And I think the teams were so good because they knew how the other people were going to move.
Yeah.
And they were always looking for the pass for their mates rather than being worried that they were going to get tackled or the negative consequences of not being good. I quit football in year 9. I was always on the team sheet and I always hated it. And it wasn't until maybe I was 18 and I'd been bumped up from the very casual third team for rugby into the second team. And at that point recognised that even though the lads I was playing with had 5-6 names in the name and wore their Barber jackets.
I know that world,
I found that actually I connected really well with the inside centre. And if we were a little bit gung-ho about it, we could probably scare people at the fact that we'd be so direct. And it wasn't necessarily about scoring more than the other team. We would probably get battered.
It's about that relationship.
It was that relationship. And always knowing that there was going to be somebody there to follow up if you made a tackle or got tackled. And it was that feeling for the first time of this is what it's like to be in a team. This is what it's like to be in a relationship. Which I hadn't had at any level really up until that point.
It comes back to that thing about being part of something bigger than yourself that I was talking about, and that sense of holism, being of interdependencies and how we can, and that's where I think there's huge value in competitive sport, but it's about how we frame that and support people to participate in that and create more inclusive parameters for people to participate. There is value in it, but it's about understanding the different sorts of systems of value that we can ascribe to it. I mean, this comes back to we started with thinking about my academic writing on sport and literature and Kes, which is like Barry Hines' most famous work probably. And that to me is one way of reading it, is to think about what we've just been describing about sport at school, and Barry Hines was a PE teacher at the time, and he'd realised that he because of his kind of developing politics, if you like, of education, he'd started to see PE as actually a way of encoding a particular kind of masculine narrative upon young working class kids. That there was a form of masculinity that was encoded through sport, and that if you weren't able to subscribe to that code for whatever reason, then that was a really powerful form of exclusion. And I think he was exploring that a little bit in the Billy Casper figure. So for those people who haven't seen it, Billy Casper is a kind of bullied kid who doesn't look like any of the kids. He's less developed than them. He's a skinny, small child. on the cusp of adulthood really, but he still looks like a child, and all the other kids in his class are big, gruff, Barnsley blokes. There's a great scene which you can show to anyone and they find funny and find meaning in it, I think, where a school teacher, played by Brian Glover, Mr. Sugden, is a very nasty bullying teacher, and he referees a football match, and he ends up wanting to be the best player on the pitch and kind of manipulates the game to that end. But he's always shouting at Billy. Billy's the last to get picked. But as the boys are playing football, Billy's kind of climbing up on a goalpost. He's showing these unbelievable skills of like gymnastic dexterity. Throughout the film, we've been seeing him develop this incredible talent, because the film's about him discovering this relationship with a kestrel and nurturing that kestrel. And he develops this wonderful intimate literacy, which is not recognised within the curriculum, is not recognised within those value systems, is not seen as something which is a legitimate act for a young working class man to be participating in. There's even a line in the film where they say, wrong sort of bird. And he's really making explicit the fact that Billy's tastes, his interests, are out of step with those really rigid expectations about what it is to be a man in that particular class background, that particular environment, in that particular community. And PE becomes a really powerful way of showing that. And then in the changing room afterwards, you know, Billy's getting bullied and making fun of his body and all the rest of it. So it really brings home some of the stuff that I think is really prevalent in our culture now. You know, in terms of how people's bodies are shamed and how perfect bodies are kind of fetishized and glorified through the very rigid value systems that we have in kind of the sport and the fitness industry more broadly.
And there's a bit that was cut from the film, I think. So the deleted scene of Billy leading a dog off the pitch. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I saw your analysis on that.
Yeah.
And the PE teacher asked Billy to get a load of cricket bats to chase the dog away.
Yeah.
But Billy actually just has a quiet word with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought that was interesting. It was a traditionally or a stereotypically masculine versus feminine approach to dealing with the situation.
Yeah.
And actually it was the soft, gentle conversation that was most effective here.
Yeah, and that's one of the really powerful things about that film, about that novel on which it's based, is that 1968, 1969, we're seeing this alternative form of masculinity being expressed, and showing that there are other ways of being a man. You know, and ultimately, I don't want to spoil it, but kind of the ending is quite depressing in that respect. Maybe it suggests that form cannot thrive, but it is there, and its potential is shown, and the potential to resist some of those more dominant forms of masculinity, I think is hugely prophetic and very progressive, actually.
What did it take for the Woodfall films, the Angry Young Men films, to tap into this, do you think, that hadn't been done before?
Yes, I think this is something I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. So there was this flowering of kind of working class creativity in the north of England between sort of mid-1950s and early 1960s, firstly through literature and on stage, as you say, kind of called the Angry Young Man or kitchen sink movement. It was largely male protagonists, so I think probably the best of that, or one of the best examples of that was A Taste of Honey, which is written by a woman, Sheila Delaney, and centred on a young woman's experience, but largely male experiences. And I think what's really interesting about those films, novels, plays, is not necessarily their expressions of a kind of working class anger, but more their expressions of working class interiority, right? Of an inner dialogue that most of those plays, novels, films gave some degree of subjective emphasis on the inner lives of working class characters at that particular moment in British social and cultural history. And that's powerful because up to that point had been, and I think this still is really, a kind of a tendency to view the working class in very homogenous terms as a collective. And you know, writers like David Story, Sillitoe, Barry Hines later, Sheila Delaney, who I've mentioned, John Brain, began to, you know, it's talked about as anger, but I think there's also something about sadness, frustration, ambiguity. I've talked before, you know, about that story experience, and Hines as well, being caught between different worlds, not really having a framework to articulate how they felt, that sense of displacement, of not really knowing where you belong, and feeling kind of that there are no secure structures of class and identity and belonging for you. So I think that is progressive and powerful because it's actually about acknowledging, as I say, that the inner worlds of a segment of society that's tended to be viewed purely in terms of a very rigid set of kind of stereotypical traits, and also in terms of economic productivity and related to the industrial working class, and then later on to mass unemployment or post-industrial deindustrialisation, all the things that we're kind of familiar with today. And we see that again in terms of some of the really rigid and narrow ways we talk about the north of England after Brexit and all the rest of it. So I think that there's something really powerful about the way those texts gave a platform to subjectivities, really.
I've got a couple of ideas going in my head at the moment, that there's potential displacement through education, in the sense of you had your 11 plus and you could dislocate almost, that you break yourself off from where you were through education. And you have Albert Finney Jr.'s character in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, is into fashion design, from what I remember.
He loves his clothes,
Loves his clothes, which is, arguably a soft thing for a hard man to be into. And then also, I'm thinking in terms of metaphors, glass ceilings, and so maybe feeling trapped, that anger that is stereotypically put on the north.
Yeah.
And if you are educated, maybe looking up and wondering if you could be that. But maybe with Hines' experience or Story's experience, and I'm thinking about my own experience as an 8-year-old, there'd been a glass roof almost. So looking back into my own life, I had this crushing moment when I can't have been older than 8, where we were going around in a circle. We were in the school hall, and it was one of those games where you pass a tennis ball and you say what instrument you play. Yeah. And adults will do this in corporate settings as well, something to this end of, my name is and I do this. And it's a way of memorising names. It's a mnemonic that's quite helpful if you've got lots of names to learn. And it went round, and maybe 15 kids had gone in front of me, and there were a couple of repeats. And I was just like, okay, cool, I'll do my best to come up with something new. I said, my name's Jack and I play the synthesizer. And then it came to the next person who had to say what I played. Right. And they lisped and they stuttered, and they hadn't come across that word. I wasn't judging them for it. And so the teacher stopped the game and said, Jack, what's a synthesizer? I said, oh, well, it's like a piano, but you can play all sorts of different instruments from it. So a keyboard, I guess, but you can play different sounds. And the teacher said, okay, your name's Jack, you can play the keyboard. His name's Jack, he can play the keyboard. And I remember just being disappointed with my teacher, because that's not what I was playing, I'd picked something that was unique, that was different, and I was excited to share that, but then told that I couldn't have it. And I think from that point, maybe in school, felt a little bit like, I don't know, I don't really click even with the people who were teaching me at times.
So you felt that they weren't meeting you where you were. Yeah. And also maybe that they had interpreted your contribution to that activity as in some way, he's wanted to show off, or he's trying to be something he's not, and I'm going to put him back in his box a little bit. Yeah. And you're clearly someone who wants to feel that you have got some form of recognition for being different and seeing things differently, and that is like something that we'd come back to Billy Casper and Hines and that idea, and these individuals that are protagonists, they are marked as somehow different from some kind of collective, more uniform or mainstream idea of what it is to be normal, non-normative behaviours, and that's kind of quite a hot topic now, I suppose, in terms of thinking about neurodivergence and how we might challenge what it is to be normal in a more confident way. But I do think those moments you're describing in education are so formative. They can be generative, but they can also be really disabling. They're moments which really define us, and the fact that you can still think about something as an 8-year-old, it's still there, it's sticking, and that's why I think so many of these plays, novels, etc., like they focus on those really important moments of identity formation, of kind of coming of age, if you like, because those are the moments where we feel things so much more deeply and keenly. Those formative moments are the ones that we come back to. They are our origin points, and negative or positive, they are our anchoring stories, if you like. I think when they're negative, that they can be, obviously quite traumatic. That's why, it makes sense to work through them and talk to them, and to come back to one of the other themes of my conversation. I think you sometimes can only realise those moments through finding peace in something like running or a form of meditative activity or movement, which allows you the space to breathe, to think, to actually make sense of those moments. We can do this through conversation as we are today, but I think there's also a way of doing that through intentional activities and movement. Like running. It's such a powerful way of unlocking that.
I think how you described it with the volunteers, that they're giving up their time for the run, or they're giving their time to the run.
Yeah.
It's that thing of building something together.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I got from the half marathon in particular, is that I was a part of a living, breathing thing. And so the end goal wasn't important, because my contribution was the steps that I was putting in and the training that I'd put in up to that point.
Exactly.
And running with the guy next to me, and just being able to be part of something bigger that was all constructed. And I haven't necessarily meant to write this for you, but in the newsletter that I put out today, I mentioned how both you and Jack Martindale told me to go to a run club when I was struggling with running.
Yeah.
And something that I've enjoyed about it is that I can go to it, and like you said with parkrun, I don't necessarily need to talk to other people.
Yeah.
But I also don't need to plan the route, and I don't need to set the pace. I can just be among people who are happy to go running.
Yeah.
And having access to that energy, I don't need to pay for it.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point I will be able to pay it back. Hopefully I already have. But it's that thing of this thing exists and it breathes, and it potentially grows as more people come into it, or people get married as a result of it, or they start businesses together, or it's a lived in experience. And if you can find that as the outcome, as the thing to aspire towards, rather than necessarily the individual medals and accolades, then maybe you'll find greater happiness with your exercise.
Yeah, this made me think of a conversation I had with a friend of mine the other day, and he made a point that now reflecting back is a really simple one, but it's not one I necessarily considered. We were talking, he's someone who played sports at a really high level and he's my age now, so he's retired from that, and he's kind of running is a way of just keeping his eye in, really, in terms of exercise. And where he works at school, there are a few of them that do it, and they'll do a parkrun together on a Saturday morning, just have a cup of coffee afterwards and a chat. And he was like, normally we would go to the pub together, but actually it's an alternative. Now look, I love a beer, I love being in the pub with friends. It's a great way of having some amazing conversations and that, but actually we probably do need to find other ways of connecting with each other that don't always involve alcohol and being in a pub. And actually running together can be a really powerful way of just unlocking some of those barriers that we might have socially, because it's a shared activity, our endorphins are up, we're doing the same thing together, we can talk about the run, we can talk about the weather, that then becomes a doorway into all sorts of other conversations. How are you doing today? And it's a really powerful way of sort of structuring a social interaction, but it's also a really healthy one. And then it's the bit afterwards, it's a drink or the coffee or the walk back or whatever it is. And that's a beautiful thing, And I think the reason I gave you that advice was not necessarily on the social side, because I think you were asking me about how to improve your times and stuff, but it's absolutely, it's symbiotically connected to the how do you improve your times, because it gives you access to knowledge, to people to talk to about, I learned so much from just the guys I run with. We just talk to each other about our own running. We run together. One of them will say to me, yeah, I think, you need to do that, or I've been watching that. And I can trust their perspective, because we've run miles and miles and miles together. We've also had amazing, deep conversations, and also just chatted about nothing, really. I also don't think I would have met them in normal life, but we've come together because of running, There is something really powerful in that I don't think is necessarily, we're so siloed now. It's very much a cliche, but I think it's true that we do live in echo chambers, and we just around people that look like us, sound like us, have the same interests, beliefs, views. And I think, these sorts of different sorts of shared activities create new parameters for engagement with more diverse experiences, Yeah. Having said that, I also think running is, to come back to class, really a very middle class sport, and I think quite a sort of homogenous identity associated with it. And you can only look at the Sheffield parkruns, where you get 1,000 people sometimes down at Endcliffe, 500 at Millhouses, 600 at Hillsborough, and you get less than 100 at Manor Castle, at Concord, and actually those are fantastic events, and that's where the real value of parkrun lies, I think. But it is interesting that it's still very much a middle class sport, but that's a whole other kind of worms. But yeah.
Looking at your shoes there,
Mm-hmm.
and I've just seen that Adidas have launched a £450 pair.
Which you can only use once, I think. Pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
And obviously at the start of this conversation, we talk about sport as a way to get out.
Yeah.
And in The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, our protagonist is running from but around Borstal
Yes.
in plimsolls.
Mm.
You know, no shock protection,
Yeah.
maybe not that much grip to speak
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
Running should be one of the most accessible sports in the sense that if you can walk,
Yeah.
hopefully you can move your feet slightly quicker in front of
Oh, yeah.
each other. But you see these trainers from Adidas.
Yeah.
I'm of two minds about it. Where do you stand? You know?
Heart and head response, you know, I think probably, God, definitely got a running shoe problem. And I think it's that you've got to be aware of it, but you're looking for the marginal gains all the time, you know, and you're like, okay. And it's also a fear thing. I know I ran my fastest ever 5K that I don't think I'll ever surpass, 17 minutes 37, back in 2019, wearing a pair of Vaporflies, Nike 4%, and I just felt like I floated on them. That's like the first generation of carbon plated shoes. And then you just don't ever believe that you can run fast without them, so you're locked in there.
Yeah.
So it's quite dangerous, I think, for my wallet, but also it's like it runs against so much of what I've said, right, which is about the need to be much more mindful of seeing running beyond that instrumental endpoint, beyond that very narrow number, that the value comes from the number. And it's also, you know, it's consumerism. It's like that's a short-term dopamine hit, isn't it? It's like buying a record or buying another overshirt or whatever it is. You know, you get advertised to on the internet and you go, "Ooh, I need that. It's going to make my running better, my life better." So I definitely have far too many running shoes. But I would say as well, it's important that we remember that, you know, I mean, I see plenty of runners who will use carbons only fleetingly and training. You know, there's runners the guy I run with, he swears by getting 1,000 miles out of shoes, and there's not very much difference between us in terms of our times. Not very much difference in terms of our training. There's a whole set of, and you'll have seen this a lot in your work, Jack. But you know, research that is commissioned to kind of commercial ends, really. What does the science say and all the rest of it? And it's, if you take a step back from it, you realise that we're just being, any kind of experience of social media when you're interested in fitness is you're negotiating multiple adverts. That's what content is ultimately, isn't it? We're trying to sell us stuff. And yes, I am absolutely a sucker for it because, you know, I love the feeling of a fresh pair of like carbon plated shoes on my feet, or and you always think, oh, I found these shoes and they're great, and then the next one comes along, and that's how capitalism works, isn't it? I think you've got to be aware of what it's doing to you. So I'm going to fess up and say that's my problem and I'm working on it.
That phrase is so, I can see that as a tattoo at some point. I love the feel of carbon plated shoes on your feet.
I know, it's pretty sad, isn't it? Yeah. But no, you've not had it yet. I suppose you probably at that stage in your running when, you know, it's early doors, you probably got one or two pairs of running shoes. But when you see a pair of carbon plates in the sale and you've got a 10k race coming up, and we were talking before about your 10k target, it's pretty attractive.
Of course, yeah. No, I would love to feel what that's like, and I think after I've run the Sheffield 10k, I probably will look to replace these ones, because you don't want to do a race in brand new shoes, do you?
Well, I think with the carbon plates it's slightly different actually.
In
a way, you want to run as little as possible in them.
Okay.
So you probably can, but I do think it's important to try them on. But like they pretty much fly out of the box. You know, you don't need to break them in. It's just like off you go.
Yeah, and we can confirm there's no commission on this.
There absolutely isn't. I won't tell you the specific brands. I think the brands are different for different people, actually, for different shoes. And believe me, I've tried quite a lot. I've had different feet, I should say, different styles of running. But yeah, there are certain ones that actually you don't notice as much of a difference. But there are some where, yeah, you really do notice that, like, that bounce. But they're so expensive. I want to be in a place where, you know, I can legitimately say to people that you could just put on a pair of shoes and go out and run. And actually, I think that's true. I think I'm the one with the problem when I talk about, you know, this desire for the next shoe and only running 200 miles and thinking, oh, these have gone, I need to get some more. like ultimately, I think you can probably get by with a pair of like my first running shoes were from Decathlon when I was a penniless student, and I ran. I was very happy with the running that I did in those shoes, you know. So I think it's important to kind of remember that, and there are loads of ways of getting access to shoes now, recycled shoes and all the rest of it, restored shoes, more sustainable brands, and I think it's really important to do that. But yeah, Decathlon, and I'm not on any commission here, do plenty of accessible, good quality, but well-priced shoes that are going to last you.
My take on it is exactly what you said, that if you've got a pair of shoes and you've got the want to give it a go, that should be enough.
Yeah, exactly.
At the same time, we shouldn't cap people on the other end of the spectrum.
No.
So people who are pushing the sub 2, the sub 156, I think we're on now, possibly.
Yeah.
That should be allowed.
Yeah, and that's all about like understanding the relationship between technological innovation and and in partnership with the human, the capacity of the human body to innovate, to push itself to its limits. And I think that partnership is beautiful. So it's an amazing thing. And you know, you talk about, we're all familiar with film like Forrest Gump, where he's running all those miles in a pair of Nike Cortez or whatever it is. Like, you put those are fashion shoes now. You can't imagine that, but people were running those shoes that we now wear, like the New Balance shoes that are so ubiquitous. So those are based on the running shoes, you know. So clearly there's been, and I remember when I started running, pre-carbons, pre-cushioning, we had different trends. We had the kind of zero drop shoes. That was a thing for a while. That when I was started, it was very hard and structured shoes. We talked much more about gait and having a particular gait and shoes. You know, I just think the trends, there are different innovations, different moments, different fashions. I think it's important to not fixate on that stuff too much and actually to think about why you're doing it and what it's all about.
I think we're close to bringing it into land. Is there anything we've not covered?
No, it's been great. We've had a wide range of conversation, haven't we? Yeah, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. And any links do you want to send people to anything you're up to at the moment?
If you want to read my academic work, most of it is paywalled, but there is an article that's open access, which is about, if you're interested in the Barry Hines and David Story work I talked about, and These Sporting Lives, I think you'll link to that. And also my book on KES. It's very rare in academic writing for there to be a book that's available, which is reasonably priced. I think it's about 11 quid at the moment. So if you're interested in KES and want to read more about that, then that book is out with British Film Institute and Bloomsbury. So that's something that I would, encourage any KES fans to check out and tell me what they think about it, because I always love to hear what people's thoughts are on that film, and also on the book and whether I've done justice to it.
Perfect. And maybe we will get a catch up in on the other side of some personal best, whatever best looks like.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That would be good to talk about. What does it mean to actually enjoy, feel a sense of success from a run, from a race? And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do in September in your 10K.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate I'm going to be there because I'm going to Oasis. So slightly different kind of activity. But,
Don't look back in anger, eh?
Indeed, very nice.
Cheers, Dave.
Cheers, Jack. Nice one.